am just thrilled to be here today with one of my really good friends, Miriam Gentle. I'm your host, Diane Gatsis Havinga. As I mentioned, it's tax day, April 15th. Miriam comes to us through Pastoral Ministries as an associate pastor, normally associated, use that loosely, with the Village Church, and I'm sure most people here know you as a harpist too.
Right.
And we're not going to dwell about that today.
Right.
But I thought maybe, Miriam, we should start our program, kind of set the scene with a particular piece that you want to share with us. You want to talk a little bit about the piece and then go ahead and play it?
Yes, so this piece that I'm going to play is a 13th century chant, a Benedictine chant. So it's one that's actually in many Christian hymn books, but the music predates many of the hymns that we sing. And the words are basically words of adoration to God. And in English, the translation is, "Humbly I adore thee, verity unseen, who thy glory hidest beneath the shadows mean." So it's just an adoration to the God that we don't see, but that we know and we adore.
Well, I don't know if it's just because it's a harp, and harp playing always kind of gets me into this more calm, peaceful setting, or the piece that you play that's more of a religious slant. So several questions right off the bat, and then we'll really dwell into our topic. When you're playing a piece that is religious in nature, do you approach it differently than you would if, say, you're playing a popular tune?
Yeah. That's a great question. I tend to approach the music thinking if there are words for for hymns and religious music, if there are words, I try to sing with my harp. See, I don't sing. I'm not a singer, but the harp is my voice. So if I know that there are words to it, I try to give a phrase or an inflection as if I was singing it. And this particular piece, imagine a monastery out in the mountains somewhere, and the monks are chanting, and their chanting voices are their worship to God. And that's what this is. Now, the harp doesn't quite give that vocal quality, but you can kind of imagine that flowing, you know, the words are flowing out of the monks, the priests, and just going up to God. You know, that's that sense. When I do popular music, and I do that too because I've played in many restaurants and weddings and so forth, again, I think of the lyrics, and if I know the lyrics, I try to sing with my instrument. But it's just one more way to bring music, to get back to the theme of sacred music. Using instrumental music is just one more way to bring a way to worship into the worship setting.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking every religion uses music in their worship. of some kind, and whether or
Yes.
not it's just the voice chanting.
And it could be that. I want to say, I would say all of them in some way, whether it's chanting, vocal chanting. There are obviously many Christian denominations that use piano or organ as part of an accompaniment. Now, there are some that are very strict, and because the word organ doesn't appear in the Bible, there are some strains of
Really?
Christianity that because the word organ wasn't in the Bible, they don't use instruments, and they're known as the a cappella Christians. A cappella being an Italian term.
So they have a choir.
They might have a choir, or the congregation is a choir, and there are no instruments accompanying them during the worship service. Now, they might for other occasions have, like for weddings or so forth. But so yes, in a lot of traditions, they would have different kinds of instruments. In the Jewish synagogues, they do have pianos and organs too. And I used to play the harp for bar mitzvahs. Many years ago, I used to accompany the cantor during the bar mitzvahs, and that was great fun. I enjoyed that.
So why do you think religion decided they needed art? And I'll dwell back to my original question or statement where I said art, or should we really call it art?
Yeah.
But why do you think, I mean, if we serve, memory serves us, whether or not you've been to the just amazing cathedrals overseas, or some of the ones here, especially here in, there's several even in Washington, D.C., they're full of, again, art. It could be statues, it could be pictures,
Right.
or icons.
Stained glass
or
windows.
The stained glass
Yes,
windows,
mosaics.
right. So
Right.
why do you think that whole thing kind of developed, and it's become really an integral part of worship?
Well, I think there's just this human need to reach God in any way that you can. And sometimes words are not enough. For some people, artists, they see the world differently. And even back as in early Christianity in the catacombs where they used to meet when Christianity was illegal in the Roman Empire, the Western, the people that met in these underground burial caves still found a need to leave their mark on the walls in some way to create a worship space even amongst the burial, amongst the graves. So even as early as that. But I think, again, that Christianity can, and I speak from a Christian perspective, that sometimes our services are too wordy. We have sermons, we have spoken prayers, we read our scripture, and then sometimes you just need a break from that to get out of your head and to get into another space. So when you have art on the walls or saints depicted in statues, have you been to the cathedral in oh, my brain just disappeared. In Italy, there's so many, and there's so many beautiful statues that you can go and look at and gaze and get another perspective when you worship. Stained glass windows, mosaics, all those I think fill a need. They fill a need in worship that sometimes words just don't.
Well, from an Orthodox perspective, I can say that the churches are designed so that when you enter, you're entering another world. You're leaving the world, your worldly cares behind, and you enter the sanctuary so that you're not in, say, everyday life. You are in the presence of God. And during a regular Sunday liturgy, actually, it occurred to me that about maybe halfway through the service, there's an actual hymn where the choir will say, it's time to, we have prayed for the world, we have prayed for good weather and health and whatever. Now it's time to put away our worldly cares and concentrate on what the next part of the service is, which is the Holy Eucharist or communion. So it gives you that whole sense. When I was at St. Petersburg, Russia, I went to several Russian cathedrals, and what you're seeing now, I think, clearly demonstrates some of the things we're talking about. You enter these huge cathedrals, and they are just full of the icons, and it can be mosaic, it can be, you know, painted, it could be wooden objects like, you know, jewels, and it's just it's literally from the ceiling to the floor. And most of them, you're always going to have the dome where you're always going to see Jesus with the sign of the peace. Will always be in the dome of any Orthodox church that is fortunate to be decorated, because we're not talking, and churches in America aren't as elaborate, and I really do think it's because of the money. You're talking lots and lots of money for this type of I don't want to say decoration, but art.
But all these beautiful scenes that are depicted, it looks like mosaics for the most part, and the beautiful gold that's used in the vibrant colors. They are actually used also as a way to teach, a teaching tool for the person that comes in, the lay person that comes in that doesn't know maybe all the stories that are in the Bible.
And that's exactly what the priest will do at any given service. If he's referring to the nativity scene or the crucifixion, you can point, and there it is, and you see that, and and you're able to you know, in your mind what it looks like.
The Holy Family.
There's the Holy Family, and we'll talk a little bit more about the colors, but it does give you that sense of wow.
And education, as well as a beautiful visual. Stained glass windows in many of the cathedrals in Europe have that function also. So the windows will have stories or will uplift a character, a specific person in the Bible, one of the disciples, or a specific scene like the creation, Adam and Eve. And like you mentioned, that becomes a way for whoever's speaking to point to that event. But you have to remember that when these cathedrals were built, people were really not educated. They didn't know how to read. So the priest at the front was the only one who could read the Bible. They were the only ones allowed to read. And for the most part, everyone there was just there to listen, to receive the Eucharist. So the only way they could learn about the biblical story, about the stories that were in the Bible, were through looking at the stained glass windows, or in the case of the Greek Orthodox Church, all the mosaics.
So I would think that the music is the same thing, because you're using the music to either reinforce what is being said by the priest or in the Bible, or as another aid or another way.
Exactly. So, for example, in the Hebrew Bible, we have the Psalms, and the Christian tradition continues and uses these Psalms. But the Psalms, really what they are poems. It's a very poetic language, beautiful poetry that sometimes doesn't translate extremely well into English, but in the original Hebrew language, it was a very poetic form. So during the Reformation in the 1500s, I say we because I'm Protestant, but the tradition of singing the Psalms became a very important part of worship. And a lot of the Psalms were turned into metrical, meaning ways to sing. And I'm going to play one really quickly.
Oh,
Can
sure.
I?
Yeah,
That one Psalm that would be very familiar to many people in the Protestant tradition, as known as the doxology. And what many people might not know, that this is actually a psalm. something that is used at the end when we receive our offerings. People sing that as a doxology. It's a praise, thanking God, and it comes from the Psalms. And it was written, that music was written during the 1500s, during the Reformation, when John Calvin said, we need to continue using this. We don't want to throw that out. You know, they rejected a lot of Catholicism. They didn't want to reject the use of Psalms, but they wanted to turn it into music that can be sung by the regular person. And there are many, many, that's just one example, but there are many other examples of hymns that we still sing today that the music was written during that time. So music also is used as a tool to teach about the Psalms and other things. Mm-hmm.
So since I can't believe we're running low already on time, I did want to touch a little bit more on the use of icons and some of the colors and teaching. And I am not an expert by any means. I do have my cheat sheet, but I did want to share some of so in, again, the Orthodox religion, we actually have, and I never thought of it as an altar, but I guess I do have an altar in my house. My parents have a whole wall full of icons, and they range from, just Jesus by himself to, of course, I don't know any family that would not have an icon that is basically the Virgin Mary with the Christ child in their house. But I was trying to remember, I think I have 8 icons that I have collected, and I have an icon for every child. So the Virgin Mary, my daughter Maria, named after my mother Mary, but my mother in most Orthodox family is named after the Virgin Mary. Mm-hmm. So you kind of trace, that's why there's all these Johns, Nicks, Marys in Greek families, the
tradition.
The tradition. But I would like you to kind of pay attention, and we saw a little bit of, with the Russian church, footage where you mentioned there's the Holy Family, is the Christ child is never depicted in the Orthodox religion as a baby or as he's a small person.
Yes.
And some of the other elements are, I don't know if you can pick it up, let me see, the hands are, are elongated, so they're exaggerated. You can't really see the ears, but the ears would be bigger. So, and the use of color. So this is just one particular icon, and then I'll contrast it with, this is the icon that my mother got for my daughter Elizabeth, so this is Saint Elizabeth. So a little bit different, but actually still similar in the sense that the backgrounds, there's never any elaborate background. And the use of the colors, blue, the gold, a little bit of white, just to give you some.
So it's interesting because in both of these, Mary has a blue robe. It's covered, but there is blue, and my understanding is blue is a color that depicts heaven, celestial,
mystery, yes. And so the artists of the icons are never recognized. They would not, that's why I said it earlier, should we really call it art? Because they don't consider this art. This is not art, it's an icon. The artists themselves, for the most part, are unknown. They never sign their work. When you go into these churches, you're not going to learn about the artists unless it's a museum. Maybe then you would.
Because the function there is not for you to. It's not a museum, right? Like you mentioned, it's a way to bring you closer to God,
right?
And that's the point.
And as I was researching this particular program, and I have one more. This is an icon that my parents brought back from Jerusalem when they went. And again, I have more icons with Mary than I have anyone else, but Mary with the Christ child, and I don't know what that saint is, but he's some kind of, looks like he was an archbishop of the church over the years. But Again, same similar, Mary's in red. I don't remember if I ever see her without her being in red. She's always in red. And red symbolizes, of course, the color of blood, suggests life, vitality, and beauty. But in my research, I didn't realize that we don't close our eyes when we pray. And I thought, oh, I don't. And we look at our icons. So when I'm at home, like I said, I have a wall next to my bed with my icons, and that's where I do my prayers.
That's interesting because, you know, in the Protestant tradition, I would say, in a lot of other traditions, when you're closing your eyes to block out things so you can concentrate on your prayer to God, but there you're using the icon as a way to bring you closer to God.
Exactly,
That's very interesting.
As a focus. Yeah. And so when I go to church, I don't necessarily, I wouldn't say pay attention, but I'm listening, but there is so many other elements. All the senses are being engaged because we have incense, so we have the sense of smell, candles, of course, icons, the sense of sight, listening to the choir, to the priests, perhaps to each other, so that these are all elements, and I can just sit there and gaze at the various icons, and you know, there's a lot of angels, so I might concentrate on the angel, and I always have that sense of just peace and a way to start my week.
I would say that even in the simplest of chapels, for example, in our own chapel, we have that beautiful window with a dove that is a symbol of peace. It could be a symbol of the Holy Spirit, so that when you come in, you're drawn into the space by that beautiful dove.
And the quilt, is it a quilt? The hand?
It is a quilt.
The quilt, who I actually know the artist and
okay.
had dinner with her the other night, in fact.
That's a beautiful piece.
And I like looking at the quilt too as a way to kind of focus my...
Right. So people that would say, oh, we don't have any art in our church, or our church doesn't have all that you're talking about or you experience in your church. Well, I would say you probably do, you just don't think about it. Like, we have what's called paraments, which means the altar will have, depending on the liturgical season, you'll have a cloth over that space, or over the pulpit you'll have something, and the ministers wear what we call a stole, S-T-O-L-E, and that changes depending on the liturgical season. For example, now we're in Lent, we wear purple. So even at its most basic, we have a lot of the Protestants kind of threw out a lot of that excessive art, if you will, but they don't realize that we still have something. We still have those paraments, the colors, we have music, we may have dancing, liturgical dancing. Not everybody is into everything, but by opening up the possibilities of the different ways we can worship, we can enter into the space and grow closer to God in different ways.
When you're preparing to conduct a service, what is part of your preparation?
Well, I spend countless hours writing a sermon.
The sermon's done.
Okay, the sermon's done. Okay. Well, as a musician, I'm always I'm soothed by hearing the organ prelude. I really enjoy listening to that. It brings me into the space. The music brings me in. Again, the hymns are important to me. And there are some hymns that we sing because we've known them forever, and that's fine. But I'm also open to exploring new hymns, new ways of singing, and new words. I know some people like to hang on to what they know in the old hymns, and that's great. But I like to explore. So for me, the preparation on a Sunday morning is knowing that I've already done all the work that I need to do before, so that all that's left to do is just go in and lead in worship.
I think we're going to have to leave it at that. I can't believe this time went by so quickly, and we could get into a lot more elements, but I think at least we touched on the few. The main elements, I think, basically the music and, of course, the iconography, and I hope it gives you something to think about.